it's very difficult for clergy to share these type of concerns, just everyday worries and stress, even with their congregation or certain members of the congregation, for a number of reasons. One, to let the congregation in seems to make you a little bit vulnerable, and to confide in that person, make sure it's going to stay confidential. And then also, as you stand up and preach, you want to be able to speak the word of God, even through what emotions you might be going through. And so it makes it extremely difficult for clergy to be able to deal with just the everyday stress, and then to set that aside as they walk into the pulpit on Sunday morning.
Hey, welcome back to Circuit Walkers. My name is Bill Sarden. I'm so glad you could join me today. I'm really excited about our guest today. It is my friend Garry Teeter, and we're going to be talking with him about mental health and especially mental health with clergy and how mental health affects our spiritual health as well. So, without any further ado, let's jump right in and welcome Garry in. Garry, how are you doing, brother?
I'm doing great today. It's been a good day. So I know a lot of people are kind of getting close to the end of the week, and especially clergy are thinking about their sermon for Sunday. Some have got it done, some don't. So that causes a little stress for some folks.
I
But
can I can do the victory lap. My sermon is as written as it's going to get until it gets preached, because a sermon is never done until it's preached. And then Saturday's my birthday, so after we finish with this, I'm going to go and talk to a few tattoo artists about getting a tattoo uh, as a treat for my birthday. So
that's, it's good to have those things to look forward to. I know that for a lot of clergy that stress out over the sermon, that there's many sermons laying on the floor uh, that they didn't finish while they were trying to prepare for the one that they're going to deliver. And then I get the privilege of hearing our clergy, our senior pastor or associate, when they preach three times. And so each time it's a little different, depending on the early, middle, or late sermon service that they provided for. So it's, you got to leave room for the Holy Spirit to come in there. But I know a lot of people stress out over that. But, clergy, the stress that they go through is remarkable. Most clergy do not have a good therapist or good counselors they can go to, and they do talk a lot with their peers, but I think they're still a little guarded talking to their peers, because one day that peer that you're talking to may become your district superintendent, or at least have some say over where you're appointed. So I think a lot of clergy are very cautious about opening up to one another. So maybe they have this small band of colleagues that they can talk to, and I would definitely encourage pastors to be able to have that band that they could open up to and share their thoughts and their feelings with. Because one of the studies that Barna did showed about 84% of the clergy suffer from depression.
yeah, I was just reading those statistics as well, and it is concerning. And I completely get it. Being clergy, you talked about how we generally confide in our colleagues, but in the United Methodist Church, there's that fear that your colleague might someday be your district superintendent. I have the same fear, except I confided in a colleague that was from a different denomination, only for him to reveal what we talked about in the pulpit to his congregation.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and it
It's
made me
it,
very cautious after that.
you are very cautious, and especially for clergy, especially with the itinerant system that we've got, it's very difficult for clergy to share these type of concerns, just everyday worries and stress, even with their congregation or certain members of the congregation, for a number of reasons. One, to let the congregation in seems to make you a little bit vulnerable, and to confide in that person, make sure it's going to stay confidential. And then also, as you stand up and preach, you want to be able to speak the word of God, even through what emotions you might be going through. And so it makes it extremely difficult for clergy to be able to deal with just the everyday stress and then to set that aside as they walk into the pulpit on Sunday morning. I kind of take it upon myself as a deacon in the church to run interference for my elders to make sure that nobody gets to them before they preach that Sunday morning. You know,
Yeah.
so I'm running around deflecting and heading off any concerns that people might have, so they don't get to that elder or as they're preparing their sermon to deliver it.
We all need a blocker. I can't tell you how many people have caught me as I'm getting ready to walk into a service, and like either they want to share something with me, or hey, can you make this announcement? And I'm like, I've already, you know, you don't know what you're asking here, and it seems like such a small thing, and it
Oh yeah,
is in many ways. It is small, but there are so many things going through our minds as we prepare to go and lead worship that adding that one more announcement that somebody just wants right then can throw off the very beginning of your service.
sure. And most pastors that I know have already worked on maybe the scripture they're going to use or the focus they want to take, and they may do that for months ahead. But as they start to build that message, they're doing that in the same time frame that they're dealing with administrative responsibilities and problems. And depending upon the size of church that you have, you may have staff that you have to deal with, or you may have no staff, and you do everything. And so here you are trying to prepare for that message on Sunday, which is important. It's very vital because that's where we come to worship. But you're doing church work during the week. You're taking care of your members, you're taking care of the ministries, you're taking care of your own personal issues, much less the church's issues. And underneath all of that, you're trying to carve and create a sermon, listen to what God's trying to tell you so you can deliver that on Sunday in hopes that it enriches their lives. So yeah, it's probably one of the most difficult jobs, and a lot of people don't realize how hard that is. But it's very difficult to do. Uh,
And all those are traditional roles that clergy have. But
mhm.
in preparing for this, I started thinking about the last decade, because the last decade has just been extremely difficult on all of us. But I think for United Methodist clergy, it has really been a, it's been
Yeah,
difficult.
it's been difficult on all clergy because I've done counseling with multiple different denominations, especially with clergy as they come in for therapy, and I find that a lot of similarities are there. However, I think the Methodist system is a little unique compared to a lot of other denominations because we are a social church. We have at the core of our principles social justice. And so when things are going on in the world that doesn't seem to be right or seems to exclude somebody or seems to make life more difficult, even for the marginalized, that weighs heavy on our hearts. And the last decade, you've got to stop and think what we've been through. Presidential elections, disruption around the world, COVID. It's been, these are things that they don't really teach you in seminary how to cope with a pandemic for 2 years. And the stress of keeping a church and keeping your congregation together and forming community. For a period of time, for 2 years, we orchestrated ways for people to worship, but to stay at home. And we were constantly saying, you can't come back this week, maybe next week. We're trying our best to make sure you can still worship. We're still trying to meet your needs. And the clergy have no clue how to do this because who does?
Right.
Uh, you had 1 week, a total of 1 week to figure out what the next week's day was going to look like on Sunday with no experience and no map to show you how to do that and the stress that was involved with that. Then you get on the other side of the pandemic, and now people have gotten comfortable not coming to church because we have told them it's okay to stay home and worship that way. And we still have our online services and our Facebook and our apps that we use because that's what we needed during that time of the pandemic. And now people aren't coming back to church because we've told them for 2 years, don't come. And now we're trying to get them to come back when we've already placed in their hands ways that they can somehow worship without even coming into to a church building or connecting with each other. We can do it as we're doing this podcast. We do a lot of ministry over the internet now.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I think the aftermath of COVID was more stressful than the pandemic itself. Just coming in and seeing how few people came back. And I don't know if the laity quite understand how personally we as the clergy take that. That did I do something wrong? Is it me? Yeah.
And we're human beings. It's always easier to preach to a couple of hundred people than it is to 20, because you get this feedback from them and you get the energy from them as you preach. I wished in the Methodist Church we had some more of the holy rollers with the amens and the standing up and presence of the Holy Spirit, but we kind of missed that a little bit. But yeah, I think you're right. There's two factions in that. One, I think the clergy, when we had our first Easter during the COVID, and I looked out there and there was nobody in the sanctuary. And there was about 3 or 4 of us in the chancel area, and we were doing Easter services when we normally would be filled to the brim. That you just felt that there was an emptiness there. And then the first Easter that we got to be present with everybody, and I just stood there in awe and started to cry because I felt so overjoyed that this must be like heaven is like when you show up and everybody's there praising God. And so, yeah, as clergy, we need that. And I'm not sure if laity understand that we're a community and having a presence there invigorates our neighbors, our friends, our clergy, our laity, because you're there.
Right. Yeah. And it makes all the difference in the world. I joke a lot of times that I'm I'm an energy vampire. I crave being around people, and it feeds my energy as well.
Most clergy are introverts. They when they're not preaching or in front of a congregation, for the most part, they're just going to stay home and hunker down in their office and get some rest and try to revitalize their energy. But if that phone call comes in at 2 o'clock in the morning, they're up and ready to go. If there's a need in the congregation, they're on their game. And on Sunday morning, when you're up there preaching and you feel the presence of the Holy Spirit, I can tell when a pastor's starting to get the Holy Spirit as they get up on their toes and they start to bounce. They just can't contain it anymore. They're just about to take off and explode. And a lot of people don't understand is that that's a lot of energy that's exuded through that, and we can't be that way all the time. Although laity sometimes has a way of putting us up on a pedestal and thinking that we can do no wrong, that we don't have any problems, that you're not depressed, you're not anxious, you don't chase squirrels, get distracted, and that we don't have the same common problems that most families have with relationships and meeting deadlines and problems. And so it's a very difficult profession to be in, and to always be you just can't do it.
Yeah, I don't know if you were in the session with Ron Bell at annual conference when he was giving out all the statistics about clergy burnout, clergy emotional well-being, and my laity that were at annual conference. After this, we were eating lunch, and they looked at me and they said, "Do you think what he said was true?" And I said, "No, his numbers were way low.
Yeah.
His numbers were way low. We And they were like, why? And I'm like, well, we carry everything with us. We carry your problems with us. We carry our problems with us. And we can't really talk to anybody about it. And that's a really difficult thing. And as a licensed counselor, I think you probably understand this better than anybody, the power of just being able to talk to somebody about what you're carrying. If you're enjoying what we're doing here and we're helping you with your spiritual and physical journey, why don't you take a moment and help me out as well? Leave a comment or like and subscribe. All those things help out with the algorithm. Now let's get back to the content.
Most definitely. Talk therapy is probably the most effective therapy that we see going on in today's world. You get into some deeper trauma issues, and there's some techniques and some things that can be used. And of course, medication, because a lot of the stress and anxiety that we deal with does affect our brain chemistry. And so you can pray yourself till the cows come home, as my grandmother would say. But if your brain chemistry is out of balance, if there's not enough serotonin or, going through the brain, the feel good, natural brain chemistry, you're going to be depressed. And so a lot of people have a hard time thinking about that, their depression. They can talk themselves out of it or they can work themselves out of it, when in reality, it's a brain chemistry. And sometimes medication does come in and play a very good role. And I know some people, especially in the church, don't want to be taking medication, but when you understand it as a brain chemistry and how the brain works, then you see that it's not so much the medicine that's helping you feel better or making you feel better. It's the medicine allowing the brain chemistry to work in a more balanced way. And therefore, the natural chemicals that are produced is what making you feel better. But there's a balance there between managing the stress, identifying the stressors, the things that are depressing, the things that are difficult for you, and to being able to set healthy boundaries. And then also, if need be, having some medication to give you a level playing field. And I tell my clients, I said, what medication does is it gives you that level playing field. But like any good football team, you still got to show up and play. But you don't want to take a small team and go play the Razorbacks, because that's not a level playing field. But if you stay within your conference, you've got at least a chance to beat the other team. It's still up to you to figure out how to do that. So medication levels the playing field and takes a lot of that stress and worry off of you, to be able to manage it, to be able to make good decisions. So having an evaluation done to identify what you're going through, setting good, healthy boundaries so that you protect yourself so that you won't get overwhelmed. And then, if need be, you'll have a medication assessment done to see if that can be helpful at the same time. And sometimes that medication doesn't last for a long time, just enough to get you back on a level playing field where you can make some good strategies to manage the stress. Because there's two kinds of stress. There's good stress and there's bad stress. And the body doesn't know the difference between the two. They just know it's stressful. And so you still have to manage that stress. And if you're constantly in barrage of that stress, it takes a toll on you. It'll wear you down over time. And so slowly that a lot of times people don't realize it.
So, in preparing for this interview, I did a little bit of research, and in 2019, Duke did a clergy health initiative survey of
Yes.
United Methodist clergy, and a couple of things that jumped out to me was, one, they said 49% of clergy have not seen a medical or mental health professional. But here's the thing that did jump out to me, and I wanted you to maybe comment on this, is that the clergy that did seek out the mental health professionals were generally the clergy who had a supporting and loving congregation that cared for them. And I almost find that ironic because, yes, they do need that, but it's the ones without a supportive, caring congregation that really need a mental health professional.
Well, it's very hard for anyone to decide to go to someone and say, I need help to figure out my life, or there's a problem that I need help with. Because, especially for men, we've been taught never to let them see us cry, to rub dirt on it and suck it up and go back out and play. And so we've been taught not to show our emotions or to be open and genuine with those emotions. And so it's very hard to open up to a congregation that you need some help or that you're overwhelmed. But I believe that a lot of congregations, if they knew that, they would be very supportive of that pastor. And so there's some communication issues between the pastor and the congregation. And that is, hopefully, the congregation is there to be loving and supportive and nurturing for that pastor and want them to be in a good place so that they can minister to their needs. So it has to be a working relationship between the two because it's not easy to decide I need to go to therapy and then who do I go to? I know in the Arkansas conference quite a number of years ago, we were instrumental in helping setting up a network to where clergy had a chance to go to some counselors at a agreed upon rate. And then within a year or two, Bonner Hospital there in Memphis took on that responsibility through the Arkansas Annual Conference that every clergy and family member of a clergy can now go and get mental health counseling, a number of sessions at no cost.
We actually now do that through the Methodist Health.
Methodist Health, yeah.
And we get 10 sessions. And the reason I know this is I took advantage of it last year. And it wasn't that I was having a crisis, but I needed to be able to talk to somebody that also had those same rules of confidentiality.
Exactly.
That I could talk, but also had no connection to my church whatsoever.
And that's usually what you will get when you call for that service is you'll get a therapist that's not connected to the church and may most likely not know who you are, which is good. But you should also interview that therapist and make sure that they're the right therapist for you. You get to choose if that's the right therapist or not. And if it's not, you can always request another one. And you should do that, as well as the therapist is making a decision. Do I want to work with this client? Because sometimes what the client presents with does not fit within the scope of practice of that therapist. And so the therapist has an ethical responsibility to say, what you're needing, I'm not able to provide. Let me offer you some referrals or some suggestions to go and get that particular help. We all have to file, licensed professional counselors have to file with the state licensure board what our scope of practice looks like. And so we can only practice within that scope. And so that helps, but not every therapist is going to match up to the client. Not every client is going to match up to the therapist. But having 10 sessions, if you just did one a month for a while, to be able to have a place to go and vent, talk through, bounce ideas off of somebody else that, as I say, doesn't have a dog in that fight and can help you with your thinking and your processing of information to let you know you're really getting off track or you're really on track, but still, how are you going to cope with that and what are you going to do?
Yeah. Well, I about 3 days a week, I put on a 40-pound backpack and I go walk 4 miles. And the reason I bring this up is talking to the therapist was like taking that backpack off. It wasn't so much that I was on the verge of leaving the ministry or anything, but I didn't realize how much I was carrying it until I took it off and handed it to somebody else. And that just reminds me so much of what Jesus tells us that to give me your burdens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of perpetual when you take on a burden, you seem to take on more and more and more. And so I kind of equate that to like setting your shirt on fire, and then you try to run fast enough to put the fire out. But the faster you run, it fans the flames, and you just get a bigger fire behind you. You reach a certain point where you know you can't keep doing this because you're about to get burned and it's going to hurt. And so you do what we've always been taught when something that you're wearing catches on fire is to stop, drop, and roll. Well, if I stop, I'm going to get hurt. If I drop to the ground and roll to put the fire out, I'm going to get real dirty and it's still going to hurt. But once I'm done, the fire's out. And so people have to understand that going to therapy is not just sitting around drinking tea and casually having a conversation. You should go with the expectation that there's going to be something that's going to change. Because I tell people, if you're not looking for change, then there's no reason for you to be here. You can keep doing what you've been doing. You don't need me for that. But if you're coming here because you want to change something that you want to change, not that you want to change in somebody else because you have no control over that, but you have to come wanting to change something that you're doing and you're not sure what that is, but what you are doing isn't working. So you come with the hopes that something's going to change, and that's going to be extremely difficult for a lot of people to admit that they need to change something in themselves.
One of the things that I had to come to terms with, and I'm sure other clergy have this same issue, is the more overwhelmed I get, the more I take on.
Yeah.
Instead of putting stuff aside, I add to what I'm doing.
You just keep setting your shirt on fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we do that. I think we do that because sometimes a life filled with activity suggests a life filled up with purpose. I'm so busy taking care of so many people that I must be a very important person. And it's hard to be still and know that you're not God and God is still God. You know,
Right. And I would say it's not so much an ego thing for me. It is a thing that just makes me feel like I have some kind of worth. You know, and when I get overwhelmed, I don't feel like I have as much worth. So I begin to bring in more things to try to give myself worth.
finding that balance within our life to where that we can manage and control things, we're working very smoothly and everything's flowing like it should. What people need to understand is finding that balance, because if you're out of balance one way and you don't have enough to do, that's just as detrimental as if you're out of balance the other way and you have too much to do. And so you have to balance that and you have to know yourself. Where are my limits? Where are my gifts and talents that God has blessed me with? Because I can use that to say no to some things because that's not my gift. That's not where God's called me. This is where He's called me, and I need to stay in this lane. And when you get out of balance is when you think you get into the fast lane or you pull off to the side of the road and get in a real slow lane. And God's going, I need you to get back to your normal speed. And in the other lane, I need you to slow down to get back to focused on what it is I've called you to do. And so we have to understand that when people have a lot of emotional problems, it's just because they're out of balance. What can I do to help you get back into balance? Yeah.
So we're getting close to the end of our time. So I want to focus on a couple of things before we end. First is, how does our mental health affect our spiritual health?
Oh, you can't separate body, mind, and spirit. You can't separate them. They're all going to influence each other. You going out and an amazing job of losing weight and getting back into your comfortable weight elevates your spirit
Right.
and makes you feel energized and mentally you feel good, and then spiritually you feel good, because I would imagine on some of those walks you've had some really good conversations.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And so you can't separate body, mind, and spirit. It's important that it's like a three-legged stool, and it's like the Trinity. You can't ignore one branch of the Trinity. You can't sit on a three-legged stool if one leg's missing. So you have to really work very hard to balance that out. They're so intertwined that you can't disconnect them.
All right. Second thing I wanted to ask you is, I know our congregations love their pastors. So, what are some simple things that congregations can do to care for their pastors, especially if they start to notice that their pastors are getting too stressed out or moving towards a burnout.
Yeah, I think claiming our vows that we take to be supportive with your prayers, presence, gift, service, and witness. Ask yourself, is this something I can do? Is this something I can take on? Is this something I can help? What is it that God's calling me to do so that I can go to the pastor and say, God's placed me in a position where I feel called to teach Sunday school, or I feel called to be in missions, or I feel called to welcome people. Yeah, to be able to say to the pastor, what is it that you're needing that I can help you with? I think would be very powerful. And then also to, especially if you're getting new clergy, to be able to say, here are some things that we do very well. And you may not be used to those things, but we've got excellent mission programs. We've got excellent feeding programs. And so I think it comes back to taking our vows very seriously as being United Methodist and finding somewhere in there that you can take those vows and live out that calling. Because if everybody is doing that, then it's not that you're expecting one person to do it, or you're looking at another person and you're saying they haven't done what they need to do, but everybody's making the decision for themselves. What is it that God's blessed me with that I can do that will bring your kingdom a little closer to coming? And I think that's one of the best things you can do for the clergy, best things you can do for the Methodist Church.
I can testify to that. It's just we started a reading ministry a couple of years ago, and went into the elementary schools reading. And I had a church member come to me and say, you can't do everything. Let me organize this, and I will organize it and make sure we have somebody reading every week. Man, that meant so much to me, and took some of that stress off. It was a small thing uh, that he took on, but it was huge to me.
Yeah. And you'd be amazed how your clergy is going to brighten up when they see the laity actively creating and taking on roles within the church, seeking out ways that they can be in ministry without having to be. Of course, this is a time of year that people call for nominations or leadership teams, and it completely throw your pastor in a tailspin if people came and said, "I want to volunteer for this. I'm good at that."
Yeah. I mean, there is nothing that gives us more energy than to see our congregations doing kingdom work and taking it on their own, or even just taking some ownership of something that we suggested get started.
Yeah, yeah, we've got to the clergy and laity, but I think as a church, we've got to reclaim our vows and take them seriously, and be proactive and discerning how we can use those gifts that God's given us to do ministry and not wait on somebody to teach us or lead us or create for us an opportunity.
Yeah, I think that the churches that have been the biggest blessings to me are those churches that needed me the most, because nobody had taken care. They hadn't had pastoral care in years, but they had learned how to run the church themselves. They'd learned how to do ministry themselves. What they needed me for was to be their pastor, not
Exactly.
not to be their organizer. And
Exactly.
that is such a blessing. And there's nothing in that makes a pastor feel better at the end of the day than when we get to do pastoral ministry. Even when somebody comes into our office and tells us that their life's falling apart, can you pray for me? Uh, that's a life-giving moment for a pastor.
Mhm.
Not that we want anybody's life to fall apart, but that's when we get to do what we're called to do. We're
Sure.
not called to put together budgets. We're not called to make sure that the Terminex comes out and gets rid of the bugs in the kitchen. Uh, those are just part of the job.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it depends on the size of church that you're in.
Right.
You and I both have been in the small country mom and
Right.
pop churches, and then in some of the larger churches with larger staff. And so, but you adapt to one thing, and that is they're all people, and they all need to be affirmed and seen and heard, and they need a pastor to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Garry, it has been so wonderful talking to you. And so I want to close with my traditional question that I ask every
Oh my!
guest. Uh, what is your soul's theme song?
I thought about that, and I'm very bad at songs and music. I love a lot of country music, which drives my wife crazy because she's more into the current stuff. But I'll tell you from the soulful perspective, and I don't. This is not really music, but back in the dark ages when I was able to run marathons, there was one moment that I was running a marathon down a country road that had a canopy of trees, and it had rained that morning, and so the leaves had. This was in the fall, early fall, and the leaves were yellow and orange and brown and red, and they had fallen down onto the ground and formed a very quiet carpet. And so here I am running early in the morning. Nobody else is out there. And I'm running through this canopy of trees. And at the other end is the sun rising at the far end. And the only sound that I heard was this. It's a very calm wind sound. And even now, it's been probably a good 20, 30 years since I ran my last marathon because the knees gave up on me. Uh, Whenever I need that soulful presence, I can go back to that run. I can go back to that moment and I can feel that rush of that sound that calms the soul. And so, not a song, but a sound of the wind blowing early on a fall morning and the leaves falling in the light of a new morning sun that's rising. And that has stayed with me through my meditation times. And when I need to kind of reboot, I go back to that spot.
Awesome. So nature, it's the songs of nature right there that you're describing right there.
There was nobody else. When the times I'd go running in the mornings, nobody else was out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I could yell, scream, cuss, fuss, whatever I needed to do. When my dad passed away, I cried every time I ran. And when I ran in the rain, nobody knew I was crying because everything was wet. It was such a powerful experience for me. And then that one moment, as if a prayer was being said, to go through that peace. So yeah, it's the nature sounds at a time that your body is performing at a state that a lot of people don't perform at, and to feel total peace in doing that. Yeah, I can create that memory back in my head anytime.
Well, your
Yeah.
description made me feel peaceful just now. So, Garry, thank you so much. I neglected to let people know that you also host a podcast. So this is kind of a crossover. I've appeared on yours called No Burning Bush, no KNOW, as in
We you
knowledge.
you have been gracious to be on my podcast, and it's an opportunity for clergy and laity to tell their call story. And we have known each other since our days at MTS. And I value that and cherish that because I didn't get the experience of going off to seminary like a lot of my colleagues did because I already had my master's in counseling and was still called into ministry. But the friendships, Bill and other people there that I met at MTS have just been cherished and valued. And I appreciate you doing our podcast, but I also appreciate you inviting me to be on yours. And anytime that I could be a resource to our clergy, to the podcast from a mental health standpoint, it's an honor to do that. Thank you for letting me be part of it today.
Thank you for sharing. So, if people want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Well, I'm at Benton First United Methodist Church as associate ordained deacon, and so you can get me at Garry, Garry, 2 R's, Teeter, Teeter, fmcbenton.org.
All right. Well, I will add that in the show notes as well as a link to your podcast. So my friend, I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Be blessed, Bill.
You too, my friend.
Living life to the fullest extent, with every step our hearts content.